China's trade war with Australia is affecting a growing number of industries. China has imposed tariffs on Australian wine imports ranging from 107% to 212%. Andrew Corrigan is president at the Queensland Wine Industry Association. Now, for those wondering what the Queensland Wine Industry Association, easy for me to say, is, it's the representative body across the diverse Queensland region. The Queensland wine industry has grown significantly over the years to cover around about 1,500 hectares throughout the state of Queensland. Andrew Corrigan became the president this month. Andrew is also a master of wine, a consultant and educator in wine, director of eWine Consult, and the director of Hidden Creek Wines and Catalyst Wines. Andrew Corrigan, are you the actual president, or do I refer to you as president-elect?
No, the actual president, Mike. I had been on the committee of the Queensland Wine Industry Association for the past year, but at our recent AGM, I was officially made the president. A role, it's one of these volunteer roles that all these organisations do. I mean, each state of Australia has an association of the wine producers in that state, and so that association represents, I guess it's our industry body, if you like, and we affiliate to the Australian national wine body, which is called Wine Australia, and I was officially made the president. So it's something I enjoy, I hope I'll enjoy it. It'll be a role I do for the next 2 years, presumably.
And I refer to you then as Mr. President.
Mr. President, that'll do.
Hey, can you give us an update on the impact of Chinese dumping duties on the Queensland wine industry?
Sure. Queensland, in essence and as in summary, has not ever done that much to China. Queensland certainly has had one or two larger producers, and one of those producers has been doing a bit to China. But I think they saw, and a few saw, that this problem with China has been coming for a few months now. And so I do know that one producer in Queensland that was going to be affected has been looking for other export markets and has a very active plan to put that into fruition, just like other Australian producers in other states who would be similarly affected by the Chinese ban. And I guess you'd say that there's a little bit of scrambling going on in some areas. It's been an interesting thing in that Australia has occupied quite a good position hitherto in China, where we were sending our upper premium and middle premium wines to China. We weren't really doing the low end and the cheap stuff. That part of the market was occupied by countries such as Chile and a little bit Italy and France, actually. And so we're doing very well, and I think everyone sort of knew about the news that Penfolds announced a lot, where they were doing very, very well with their upper end wines, the very expensive wines, which I think most Australians can't even afford these days, and they were sending those to China in big quantities. So I think someone with a very strong brand like Penfolds will probably be able to readily enough find other markets. I mean, they were already big in the US, and there are other, emerging wealthier middle classes in Asian countries that are interested in Australian wine, and the press releases from Penfolds say the countries such as Vietnam and Thailand and others will become markets for them. I guess the part of the Australian wine production that will scramble a little bit will be the sort of medium premium producers who haven't got such a strong brand as Penfolds. They've got a strong enough brand, I guess, but they'll have to go and find these other markets. And, we may see their wines back in the Australian market for a bit. When I say a bit, I guess it's generally considered that those that really are looking and trying hard will probably take about the 2-year time frame to replace the Chinese market with other markets, and that may come where they can't sell the wine as good a price as they used to in China, but nonetheless they'll find other buyers. So I think it's going to affect producers a lot in South Australia and other states, not so much Queensland. We in Queensland weren't that big in China. So, the bottom line to your question is that in Queensland, we're not really that affected by this Chinese ban.
How is most wine sold in this market? Are there contracts of sale where producers get paid for the wine shipped, or is it much of the business done on consignment?
No, interesting question. In fact, the lessons that have been learned are that you have the best success by miles, or hitherto you had the best success in China by miles, if you had some good control and very close relationship over your distributor. Now, a lot of producers, both large and medium, actually went and found a Chinese business and did a joint venture where they became your distributor, but you part owned them or part controlled them, or controlled them to a very great extent. So Penfolds, in fact, had their own distribution people on the ground in China. The experiences of people who went through an agent or, a merchant, various letters of credit type arrangements, generally seem to have been fairly unhappy experiences, and, wine sat in hot sheds unsold for a bit, or there was a flurry of activity to begin with, and then it wasn't that successful after a bit more time. So the story of success by Australia in China with wine has been very much controlling your own distribution and your sales channels, and that gets right down to having a very strong hand in the area sales reps and marketing and so on, and that's been pretty much the story of Australian wine in China.
What do you think has gone wrong with the China wine market for Australia, and why did they target this sector?
I don't think, and the wine industry generally would agree, that we're part of a much bigger issue. A number of industries in Australia, primary production industries, were targeted by China initially with some sort of slight complaint. They would purport to say that the particular product didn't meet some standard or whatever. In the case of Australian wine, they said, we're concerned that Australian wines are supported economically by the Australian government, and therefore it's the pricing that you're charging is not a fair price, and there are international standards that prevent countries from subsidising and then dumping product. And so the Chinese initially stated that as their excuse, and they circled around a bit, and without actually banning us, the Australian wine was held up at import locations in some areas and so on. In more recent times, they haven't bothered with any of the non-compliance excuses. They've just put a huge tariff on. They at one stage said that it was to protect Chinese winemakers, and China does have a growing wine production industry, and in fact a lot of Australians consult and help the Chinese. I think it's true to say that the Australian wine that was being imported into China has never been a threat to Chinese produced wine, but that certainly didn't stop the Chinese using it as an excuse for the moment. But of course, in recent weeks, the whole rhetoric and the whole issue has ramped up substantially, and so many other products are affected, and even just the news yesterday and today that the substantial business of exporting Australian coal to China is now threatened. Now, originally they said there was a particular sensitive mineral component in the coal that worried them. They've forgotten about that pretense. They've just announced that there's going to be bans on Australian coal. And the various experts on China have made their comments saying that, Australia is part of a bigger, international sort of jockeying for position and power that China's going through. The Chinese themselves seem to have their own internal debates about there's the hawkish people and the not so hawkish people, and it's not where you can easily find out about the internal decision process in the Chinese government, because that sort of thing is not news that's very well known. But it appears at the moment that the disruption to Australia's export to China is part of a plan by China to be sending messages to the whole world, and we just happen to be the particular easy target for the moment. I guess it all goes to the fact that Australia, and people, the politicians have been talking about this for some time, but Australia does need to diversify its export sales customers, because if we have too many big eggs in one basket and something goes wrong, it'll be expensive. And I guess just at the moment, there's a little bit of that happening to us.
The eggs is an important part of it. The egg manufacturers haven't been targeted yet, but take that aside. But the eggs in one basket, truly with wisdom of hindsight, how should producers be treating this market if they have business there?
Well, I guess because, as I mentioned earlier, the position of Australian wine in China was a really good position. We were doing the medium premium and upper premium wines, and the Chinese had a real taste for it. They still have, by the way, and a lot of Chinese are going to be annoyed that they can't get their Australian wines anymore. And for the price and the taste, Australia delivered a product that other countries don't do. Well, Australia's probably one of the masterful producers at integrating the oak barrel richness character into Australian wine, particularly our reds, of course, in what's called a seamless way. You just don't see the oak, but on the other hand, you get this chocolatey richness, which is a taste been made very famous by South Australian producers, particularly Penfolds and Wolfblass. Now, that taste is perhaps considered a little old hat in Australia because there's a slight sweet red chocolatey character to it. Although a lot of us probably learned about red wine by discovering that taste. But export countries love it, and the Chinese certainly love it. The issue with that kind of wine is that you do have to use classy oak barrels, and your winemaking has to be skillful. And that type of wine does not apply to the bottom end competitive price area. And one of the big sad issues that's always been there for us is that one of our biggest markets, which was the UK, developed a taste for the cheap end of Australia. And so a lot of people in the UK don't realise that Australia can produce these more sophisticated, very satisfying wines. But to get those wines, you've got to spend a bit more money. And the Chinese were very happy to do that. So in answer to your question in a rather long-winded way, these other markets that Australia will now have to be developing are not only going to be to get your product there, there's going to have to be the marketing to get to consumers to say to them, look, if you spend a little more money, you get this lovely wine, which is much lovelier than shopping at the bottom end.
Interesting you mentioned about the quality oak for wine. I think when I was growing up, and I grew up in a wine growing area in Victoria, but when I went to college, we didn't worry about the oak. We had cardboard cask, and they were just wonderful. Mix it with orange juice, but we've actually grown. The whole of Australia has grown, and it's an amazing industry. Can you tell us more about the particular qualities of wines from various parts of Queensland?
Sure. What is not generally known by a lot of people actually about Queensland and its wine is that we have two main regions, and they're both very high altitude, particularly an area called the Granite Belt, which accounts for most Queensland wine. The Granite Belt's on the top of the Great Dividing Range, just north of the New South Wales border. So it's actually got a lot in common with districts such as Orange and Armidale and Glen Innes. My particular own winery, Hidden Creek, has our highest vineyard is at about 1,000 metres altitude. And that's pretty high up. We're higher, for example, than the cold climate parts of Victoria. So in Victoria, the King Valley, and right up the top of the King Valley is the Whitlands area, which is where Brown Brothers gets all its grapes from to make its sparkling wines. Mm-hmm. And the Whitlands is the highest part, and it's about 820 to 850 metres. Well, we're 1,000 metres, so we're higher again. And of course, this altitude means that in winter it's freezing cold, and we get snow sort of every second or third year. And in the autumn and spring, we do get hot days, but we get cold nights. So I'm in Brisbane now, but I'll be up there this weekend. And at night time, even though we're in December, I'll have to put a light pullover on at night because that's just our climate. And you get that type of climate, though, in central Victoria, particularly in the more elevated parts. So the Grampians and the Great Western and that sort of central, slightly western part of Victoria has a relatively similar climate, although Victoria would overall be a little cooler. But certainly in terms of thinking about wine in Queensland, it's not a question of identifying with, the tropical fruit thing, because we've got these bits of Queensland that are not that at all. And I've just described the granite belt. The other area that is of note that produces quite a lot of wine, it's not as big as the granite belt, but nonetheless it's still a reasonable size, is an area called the South Burnett, and it's a district around the Mergen-Kingaroy area, and it's about the 500 metres or so altitude. Inland, again, gets pretty cool, not as cold as the granite belt, has a climate probably not unlike the Hunter Valley, perhaps a little drier than the Hunter Valley, but not unlike. So we've got those two main regions. There are other smaller regions as well, but the answer to this interest about Queensland wine is that we have the high altitude and the cold climate, and we do produce very interesting wine because there are certain grape varieties that love that type of climate, and they've been grown in central Victoria for some time. And they're varieties that thrive in inland extremes of climate, extremes of temperature. And so you get grapes from the northern Rhone Valley in France, which is the climate I've described, but particularly the northern high plains of Spain, very, very similar to the climate I'm talking about. And so the grapes of northern Rhone are Shiraz, they call it Syrah. There's also Viognier and Marsanne and Roussanne, a bit of Grenache. And then over in the Spanish regions, there's principally Tempranillo. But there's also, we call it Verdelho, they pronounce it Verdeco, but there are some other varieties as well. And these sorts of varieties grow there, that's their home, and of course they grow very well in these inland regions of Australia. And, it's no coincidence that areas such as the Great Western and the Grampians and that part of Victoria does a terrific spicy, peppery, cherry-like Shiraz, and we do that kind of style in the Granite Belt as well. Actually, we get confused with Great Western and the Grampians quite a bit if people can't see the label. And that all stands to reason because the parts of Queensland I'm describing are relatively similar to those inland parts of Victoria, and we make that kind of wine pretty well.
A lot of people in Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, New Zealand think that our wine industry is basically pineapple punch. And how dare they even think that? But by the way, I have to say this sincerely, you're a terrible person. Not even lunchtime, and I'm already thinking about a couple of sips of all for to study, to work out what I'm talking about. So it's all professional, of course, but now I'm really looking forward to a tip or two, and it's, as I said, not even lunchtime. Now, what is upon us, this is to talk about the wines that you grow. Now that Christmas is almost here, or the festive season, for those who think I'm being politically incorrect because we can't really say Christmas in some countries, what would you suggest is good buying and tasting at the moment? Now, this is something that I'm really interested in. As I said, I'm thirsty.
Well, I think a lot of Australians take the opportunity over the break, the holiday break and the holiday season, and obviously it's the friends and family thing because of Christmas and so on. You take the opportunity to meet people and enjoy lunch, which you might not ordinarily do. And of course that means even in southern parts of Australia, I mean, we can have cold spells, but generally speaking, at lunchtime across Australia, at this time of the year, it's pretty warm. And so whatever you're having with lunch lends itself to something pretty chilled and going with light foods at lunchtime. If you're doing something in the evening, that's a different thing. But the lunchtime style means that, you know, avocado and salads and prawns and light seafood and perhaps cold ham and that sort of food, which is just lovely in my view. And the lighter wines really suit that. So the chilled white wines, and if they're lighter, I think this is not the time for Chardonnay. I think Chardonnay is an evening style wine. It's more complex, it's bigger flavoured, whereas lunchtime is, well, particularly Riesling, Semillons from the Hunter Valley, the Sauvignon Blanc maybe, it's a little bigger. But one of the things we're seeing a lot in Australia of recent times are these emerging and alternative varieties. And there's a lot of very interesting white wines that are emerging as well as lighter reds. And we do those quite well in Queensland as well, but they're around Australia. So there are Italian white wines, which up until a few years ago, the Italian white grapes and so on were spurned a bit, but now you see Fiano and Vermentino quite commonly grown in different parts of Australia, and there's quite a lot of excitement. I mean, there's some fears of the fact that with global warming, we need to be careful, and these Italian white varieties are renowned that even if they're grown in a warmish climate, they hold their freshness and acidity really well. And I think Vermentino is particularly true of that. Vermentino hails from the island of Sardinia, which is off the west coast of Italy in the middle of the Mediterranean. And it's a delicious, tingly, lemony flavoured white wine, which you can serve very chilled. And it's fabulous. And Italy also offers lighter, more savoury reds that lend themselves to being chilled and served at lunchtime. And Australia does very good versions of those Italian varieties. So varieties such as Dolcetto and Barbera is a particular favourite of mine. Sangiovese, which is the famous red grape that makes Chianti, which has been quite successful in Australia. And then I guess the controversial grape variety is the Italian red variety called Nebbiolo, which is the powerhouse variety behind the red wines of Piemonte, and it makes one of Italy's most famous reds, which is called Barolo. Now, in Australia, we've had a checkered history with Nebbiolo, but nonetheless, there's some pretty good examples. It's probably a little richer than the other reds that I listed, but those Italian-style reds, either from Italy itself or the Australian examples, served chilled in hot weather for lunch. Wonderful choices in my book.
Actually, in my book, it sounds great too. By the way, as you were talking, I got a message in my earpiece from the producer to say that they've locked the wine fridge. And because of you, there goes my tipple for lunch. I'll have to wait for the evening, which is distressing to say the least.
Very distressing. They put an extra padlock on the fridge.
No, they're going to take it away, I'm sure, because where there's a will, there's a glass of wine. Andrew Corrigan, President-elect, or elected President, whichever one you want. Thank you very much. Have a great Christmas, and we'll get through this China stuff. And 2021, thank God, 2020 is gone. 2021 is hopefully a lot better than this year.
It'll be on its way. I think with hopefully COVID behind us and trips to cellar doors and all the business that wine producers love, it'll be a better year. Yes, and I think the success by Australians in getting their wine into export markets over the years has been pretty good, and China won't be easy to replace, but I think nonetheless there's some confidence levels that it'll happen in due course. So it's been lovely to talk with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Andrew, thank you very much.
All the best, Mike.